Reading is interpretation. A poem well read is a poem well understood. In this podcast, brought to you by the Literary Life podcast, poet Thomas Banks will help you increase your love and understanding of poetry. Poetry is not a silent endeavor. It's meant to be heard, and more importantly, it's meant to be recited out loud. Join us now as poet Thomas Banks presents The Well-Read Poem.
Hello, and welcome to The Well-Read Poem. Today, for the next in our series of bad poems by great poets, I chose one of the greatest poets of them all, the English poet John Milton. Milton, along with Chaucer and Shakespeare, is probably one of the two or three greatest poets ever to write in the English language. He is a man who needs almost no introduction, and if you've not read Milton previously, I would recommend, at least once in your life, making time to read his great epic, Paradise Lost, from cover to cover. Paradise Lost is unquestionably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, long poem, in the English language. And I think every native speaker of English should make a point to read it at least once. Samuel Johnson, the English lexicographer, man of letters, critic, and conversationalist, said of Paradise Lost that reader is not born who wished it longer. But you might find yourself disagreeing with Johnson once you get to the end. You might start wishing that, man, Paradise Lost, this should be 20 books long instead of 12. Anyhow, read Paradise Lost. The poem I picked today is not a long poem. It's actually one of Milton's relatively few sonnets. Milton wrote just a couple dozen sonnets. I think maybe less than 20, in fact. And Milton, as you may know, in his sonnet writing, used the sonnet for other purposes than previously it had been employed. The sonnet prior to Milton in English, as in other European languages, is almost always a love poem. 99% of the time before Milton, sonneteers had used the sonnet as a expression of passionate love. It's a economic form. It's 14 lines long. It lends itself to intense lyrical expression. Milton did write a couple of love poems. He wrote a poem, a love sonnet in memory of his dead wife. He wrote a sonnet in praise of Shakespeare and a few others. Often, though, he used the sonnet, and this is kind of strange and daring of him, he used the sonnet for the same purpose that a journalist might write an article today. So some of Milton's sonnets are actually commemorative of current events and offer, political or religious or some other perspective on them. So it's a very different sort of use than Petrarch, say, or Edmund Spenser or William Shakespeare had attempted when they had used the sonnet previously. So this poem has a big, unwieldy Greek word smack dab in the middle of it, and that word is tetrachordon. Tetrachordon in Greek would be a scale of 4 notes, is the definition I have. A scale of 4 notes, like notes of music. And it was also, tetrachordon was the name of a book that Milton had written not very long before the appearance of this sonnet. This sonnet appears in the 1640s when Milton is engaged on a series of writings, a series of tracts in defense of divorce. So in defense of the dissolution of a marriage for reasons of mutual incompatibility between the two spouses. And in Milton's day, that was a risky sort of book to write because, again, in Milton's day, generally the religious consensus in England and also the laws of England did not allow for divorce. They allowed for the annulment of a marriage, in cases where one of the spouses had been previously secretly engaged to somebody else or something like that. Reasons of complications, moral complications in the private lives of the husband or the wife prior to the marriage, but no divorce, at least legally established. And Milton wanted to change that. This is a subject he had read about and studied quite a bit. He had marshaled, Milton was one of the best read men of his day, and he had found arguments from earlier Protestant reformers like Martin Bucer and a couple of others. And he wrote not one, but I think 4 books, wrote or translated 4 books in defense of divorce under certain circumstances. Anyway, what does all this have to do with his poem? Well, naturally, Milton's books on this subject raised a hue and cry. A lot of ecclesiastical writers, both professional theologians and laymen, raised their objection to Milton, saying that, Milton is essentially sapping, one of the foundational institutions of Christian society. Milton is an iconoclast and Milton is a dangerous man. So Milton, not to be deterred. Something about Milton, you should know that Milton, when he felt he had the world against him, was almost kind of at his most self-assured. Milton liked being kind of in a minority of one. Milton was on Milton's team, and as long as he had the approval of his own conscience and presumably God, he felt that it doesn't really matter who's against me. These guys, what do they know? So Milton was a intellectually and morally confident in his own judgments, to a dangerous point, I might say. Anyhow, he didn't end up going to jail for his divorce book or anything like that. Milton did get in trouble with the government following the restoration of the monarchy, but that was for a different reason. That was because Milton had written in defense of regicide, that is, chopping the heads off kings, and that's apt to make kings, when they get a hold of you, kind of irate, which did in fact happen. So Milton here, I'm going to read you his sonnet Tetrachordon, and usually this poem is listed under the title Sonnet 11 in Milton's works. It's called the Tetrachordon Sonnet 2 because it's written in defense of his book, Tetrachordon. Anyway, enough preamble. Let me read the poem. Sonnet 11 by John Milton. A book was writ of late called Tetrachordon, and woven close both matter, form, and style. The subject new. It walked the town a while, numbering good intellects, now seldom poured on. Cries the stall reader, bless us! What a word on a title page is this! And some in files stand spelling false, while one might walk to Mile End Green. Why is it harder, sirs, than Gordon, Colkitto, or MacDonnell, or Galasp? Those rugged names to our like mouths grow sleek that would have made Quintilian stare and gasp. Thy age, like ours, O soul of Sir John Cheek, hated not learning worse than toad or asp, when thou taught'st Cambridge and King Edward Greek. Okay, so this is a poem that requires it kind of requires a learned commentary on the page, footnotes accompanying it. The poem in the edition I'm looking at has 11 footnotes in 14 lines. So John Milton, not just every poet can write a 14-line poem and need 11 footnotes to explain what he's talking about. So he kind of wanders around from his chosen subject. It's a very circuitous poem, and it almost feels like it was improvised in kind of the heat of a moment of impatience. So it's purportedly written in defense not so much of the matter of his book as the title. And in John Milton's day, there were more people. There was a larger audience that might have been impressed by a showy display of learning, such as giving a book a Greek title, than exists in our day. If you were writing today a book and you wanted to give it a title in ancient Greek, probably your editor and your publisher, they should get a hold of you and shake some sense into you because you want to sell some books, and selling books with ancient Greek titles is, not the best marketing strategy. In Milton's day, though, of course, not everybody could read Greek. Greek in John Milton's day, that was the province, the linguistic province of only a small, educated minority, which included Milton himself. Milton is variously praised and blamed by his readers for parading his learning in his poems. He actually doesn't do it quite so shamelessly most of the time. Here, I think he deserves something of a rebuke. So he's writing sort of in defense of this title I've chosen for my book, and he says it's really not much harder, the title of my book, to say than consider some common names that everybody knows how to pronounce. And he gives the example of four Scottish names: Gordon, Colkitto, MacDonald, or Galasp, or Galasp. I'm not even certain if that's it's hard for me to say, Galasp. Those rugged names to our like mouths grow sleek. So we can say those names, even though they're foreign. And keep in mind, Scotland and England in the 1600s are much more foreign as countries than they are today. There is as yet no united kingdom. They have a common monarch, but not common parliaments. And it would be actually kind of difficult for a Scotsman and an Englishman of John Milton's day to converse in ordinary conversation. Um, and then so here where he says those rugged names to our like mouths grow sleek. So we find it easy to say these names that would have made Quintilian stare and gasp. Quintilian was a Roman teacher of rhetoric and also wrote a long book about rhetoric and education in general. He was a major, what's the word I'm looking for? A pedagogue of major importance in the first century AD. So again, Milton dropping in a little, just casually here, a little bit of classical learning. Quintilian. You have to know who he is if you're going to get the gist of this poem. Thy age like ours, oh, and now he apostrophizes that as he addresses someone who's not there. O soul of Sir John Cheek. Okay, again, we don't know who this guy is, Sir John Cheek. I knew who Quintilian was. John Cheek, I was kind of rough on. Oh, so he was the tutor to King Edward VI. And he was also a tutor of Greek in the English universities. And he also wrote in defense of the English Reformation. So he was one of the first generation of English Protestants about 100 years before Milton. So, thy age like ours, O soul of Sir John Cheek, hated not learning worse than toad or asp, when thou taught'st Cambridge and King Edward Greek. So the implication that Sir John Cheek, if he read the title of my book, this long dead tutor of of royalty and teacher of Greek, he would have understood it right away because his age actually valued learning, unlike the Philistine knaves in ours who can't even be bothered to read a title page. I don't know that Milton's argument is a very good one. It doesn't really make me want to read his divorce pamphlets. It doesn't really want me to take those up again. It shows that he's a learned man. I suppose he succeeds in demonstrating that he is probably better educated than his adversaries, and that's something. Does it succeed in demonstrating, that this title actually is perfectly lucid and a child of 6 could understand it? Well, perhaps it doesn't. Nonetheless, though, let me read this poem again. This argumentative, digressive, and also, that's not a very good word to rhyme with, tetrachordon. I have to say in English, tetrachordon, he rhymes with poured on and word on and Gordon. Those are some very rugged rhymes that kind of make you stare and arch your eyebrow. Yeah, so I think John Milton very, very often wrote better than this. I don't think he ever wrote as badly. So, Sonnet 11 by John Milton. A book was writ of late called Tetrachordon, and woven close, both matter, form, and style. The subject new. It walked the town a while, numbering good intellects, now seldom poured on. Cries the stall reader, bless us! What a word on a title page is this! And some in file stand spelling false, while one might walk to Mile End Green. Why is it harder, sirs, than Gordon, Colkitto, or MacDonald, or Galasp? Those rugged names to our like mouths grow sleek that would have made Quintilian stare and gasp. Thy age, like ours, O soul of Sir John Cheek, hated not learning worse than toad or asp, when thou taught'st Cambridge and King Edward Greek. Maybe another thing that I think leaves the reader prejudiced against Milton's the standpoint he takes here. He begins by praising his own book, where he says the book was woven close, both matter of form and style. So it's a well-arranged book. I have disposed my arguments very, very gracefully here. It walked the town a while, numbering good intellects. Yes, so all the smart people had to read this book and felt themselves moved by it. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's something just it doesn't undermine Milton's position as a writer. Again, writing one bad sonnet in your lifetime is nothing to write home about, but there's something kind of obnoxious in the self-praise here. I find this poem at once smug and obnoxiously argumentative. And anyhow, Milton wrote many, many better things than this, but I thought I would dwell on this poem a bit. All right, thank you very much. This has been the Well-Read Poem.
This has been The Well-Read Poem with poet Thomas Banks, brought to you by the Literary Life podcast. For show notes and the text of the poem, visit theliterary.life. To find out more about Thomas Banks and the poetry resources he offers, go to houseofhumaneletters.com. This podcast is patron-supported. Visit patreon.com/theliterarylife to find out how you can support this podcast and get additional bonus content, including monthly live poetry explications. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Thank you for listening.